We hear it from our families, and we definitely feel it in the voting booth. But what if the very foundation of how we categorize these beliefs is totally flawed? Let's put it to the test.
So where do you fall on the political spectrum? If I asked you to place yourself on that familiar horizontal line, with the left on one side and the right on the other, you probably could, right? It's our universal shorthand. But over the next few minutes, we're going to look at the data, the history, and the political science to deconstruct this foundational premise. We want to figure out if this single line is actually capturing the truth or if it's kind of hiding it.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with Section 1, the left versus the right, exploring the classic binary. Then Section 2, mapping the global parliament, to see how this plays out worldwide. Next up is Section 3, origins of the spectrum, where we'll find out where this line actually came from. We'll follow that with Section 4, beyond a single line, and finally wrap up with Section 5, is the spectrum a myth? All right, let's get started.
Section 1, the left versus the right, understanding the classic binary.
Before we completely pull the spectrum apart, let's just look at how this highly polarized binary defines a couple of the most critical hot-button issues today, purely objectively. On the economy, the liberal view generally emphasizes that government action is needed to achieve equal opportunity. That means regulating the economy, protecting citizens from big business, and raising taxes on the wealthy to fund public interest programs. On the flip side, the conservative view is anchored in personal responsibility and limited government. They argue that competitive capitalism and free markets produce more economic growth and higher standards of living than systems burdened by heavy government regulation.
And we see this exact same philosophical divide when we look at healthcare, right? The left argues that healthcare is a fundamental right, and the government should provide equal benefits for everyone, regardless of their ability to pay. The right, meanwhile, argues for a competitive, privatized, free market system, with the belief that government-run programs ultimately result in higher costs and lower quality care. Basically, these are two very distinct, opposing frameworks for solving societal problems.
Moving on to Section 2, mapping the global parliament, ideology on a planetary scale. So, how does this political alignment actually look when we zoom out to the entire globe? Well, 2024 was an absolutely monumental year for elections, and researchers at Arden Strategies built a pretty fascinating model to map the results. Imagine aggregating every government on Earth into a single 1,000-seat global parliament, where each seat represents about 5 million people. In the democratic world, power is fairly evenly split. The center-right holds 307 seats, while the left wing and center-left combine for roughly 194. But here's the most striking takeaway from all this. A massive block of 303 seats doesn't fall onto the democratic left-right spectrum at all. Those represent dictatorships. Yeah, almost a third of the globe does not live in a democratic regime.
The catalyst for this rapidly shifting global map is just unprecedented voter turnout. Over 2 billion people voted in 2024. That is an enormous number of elections packed into a single year. And researchers found a massive trend of anti-incumbency worldwide. Voters were deeply frustrated by economic struggles, inflation, and the rising cost of living. This intense economic anxiety caused major shifts, with ruling parties all over the world either losing power entirely or seeing their majorities dramatically reduced, which completely reshaped that global parliament we just looked at.
Which brings us to Section 3, origins of the spectrum. Where did the line come from?
We rely so heavily on this left-right line to define the world, but where did it actually originate? It's older than you might think. Believe it or not, the terms left and right actually started as a seating chart. During the French Revolution in 1789, the aristocracy, who supported the old royal order, literally sat on the right side of the assembly. The commoners, who supported republicanism and secularism, sat on the left. Fast forward to the 20th century, and academics tried to scientifically map these political values. In 1950, Leonard Ferguson measured attitudes on things like censorship and theism. And in 1973, Milton Rokeach tried to map values based on freedom versus equality. But, as they'd soon figure out, something kept going wrong with this single-line model.
By 1956, a researcher named Hans Eysenck realized that a single left-right line was completely inadequate. He noticed that the extreme left and the extreme right both exhibited severe authoritarianism and aggressive tendencies, despite being on opposite ends of the economic spectrum. So he added a second vertical axis, which he called tough-minded versus tender-minded, to try and actually capture democratic versus authoritarian values. The single line was already failing.
Let's expand on that in Section 4, beyond a single line, adding complexity to the map.
If a single axis is failing us, how do modern political scientists attempt to map ideology more accurately?
Well, building on Eysenck's early ideas, we get tools like the political compass model. It brilliantly illustrates how two separate axes create a vastly more nuanced landscape. The horizontal axis measures economic policy, left for collective control, right for individual free markets. But the vertical axis measures social policy, authoritarian at the top, demanding obedience, and libertarian at the bottom, maximizing personal freedom. This explains perfectly how someone can be economically far right but socially libertarian, or economically far left but socially authoritarian.
And we desperately need this nuance, because broad labels like the left are just incredibly imprecise. Consider democratic socialism for a second. It aims to achieve classic socialist goals, like the abolition of private property and the collectivization of the means of production, but it insists this absolutely must be done through democratic processes rather than violent revolution.
Now compare that directly with social democracy. Social democracy actually operates within a capitalist mixed economy. It keeps private property intact but uses progressive taxation to fund a massive welfare state. We're talking things like universal health care and strong union rights. Democratic socialism, on the other hand, wants to abolish private ownership of capital entirely in favor of worker-owned enterprises. These are fundamentally different economic goals. Yet on a single left-right line, they are squashed right next to each other. So much vital nuance is just totally lost.
This brings us to our final part, Section 5. Is the spectrum a myth? Deconstructing the paradigm.
What if the problem isn't just that the line lacks nuance, but that the line shouldn't exist at all? Professor Hiram Lewis, co-author of The Myth of Left and Right, argues that mathematically, a spectrum can only model one single issue. But politics involves hundreds of separate issues: tax policy, foreign policy, environmental regulations, you name it. Lewis and his brother Verlin argue that there is actually no consistent underlying philosophy connecting all the issues on the left or all the issues on the right. To explain this, they use a really brilliant analogy. Imagine showing up at a grocery store and being handed either a red shopping cart or a blue shopping cart. Inside each basket is just a totally random bundle of products. That's what modern political parties are, just shifting baskets of disparate issues. It's not that parties are moving left or right, they're basically just swapping out the random goods in their baskets over time.
And buying into this myth of ideological polarization is actually incredibly dangerous. When you believe there's just one big ideological line, it forces citizens into unthinking tribal loyalty. It drives extremism because if you believe the left or the right is inherently righteous, then going to the furthest logical extreme of that side makes you feel even more righteous. It creates the illusion that we are entirely polarized and entirely enemies, which completely impoverishes our ability to have a reasoned civil debate.
So what's the solution? How do we break out of this trap? The researchers propose changing our vocabulary entirely. Step 1. Drop the totalizing left and right labels. Stop calling someone a right-wing this or a left-wing that. Step 2. Speak strictly issue by issue. Say, you're in favor of environmental protection, or you favor a free market approach to healthcare. By doing this, we reach Step 3. Suddenly, every person you approach is a unique bundle of issue positions. You might disagree with them entirely on taxes, but totally agree with them on zoning laws. And that leads us to our final question for today. If we stop trying to force ourselves, and everyone around us, onto a 200-year-old seating chart from the French Revolution, who might you actually agree with? If you look at people as individuals with unique baskets of ideas, rather than political enemies on a one-dimensional spectrum, the world suddenly becomes a place full of potential allies.